All right, well, I just wanted to say a few words about Dharma City before we start. So, we're into our series at the moment on Upgrade Your Mind. From last week, Uncle Bandu introduced us to mindfulness in the age of smartphones, which seem to be relevant to just about everybody. And I think tonight's also going to be relevant to everybody. Dharma City is going to be talking about clear thinking, mindfulness in relation to how we think. Dharma City is well qualified to sort of talk about this subject. I've known him for 25 years, something like that. And he's a very deep meditator, he's a very deep thinker, he's very, very mindful in all sorts of things that he does, particularly I've noticed with his work. Sitting and do all sorts of professional jobs. Currently, he's working in mental health, somewhere where you have to be very mindful in what you're doing. And so I think we'll have a really interesting talk tonight from Dharma City. Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. So yeah, the brief tonight, carrying on the series on tech and upgrade your mind, it's really going to be, it's kind of about clear thinking, but it's specifically about clear thinking in relation to the social sphere. Because, over the last 15, 20 years in particular, there's been incredible advancements in technology in relation to our social lives. As Sadharaja was saying, I work in mental health, and we've got a team of about 12 staff, but quite a lot of us are maybe in our late 40s, 50s, even 60s. And we've got a few, maybe 2 or 3 staff members that are in their 20s, early 20s or so. And, in other words, the millennials, those of us in our 40s and 50s, are Gen X and baby boomers, even, if you understand these generational terms. Anyway, we got talking and we suddenly realised that the millennials, the 20-somethings in the team, they'd always known social media, they'd always known technology, they'd all grown up with the internet, with the webs, and smartphones, social media. And the older ones, like myself, we were kind of talking about, what our lives were like when we were in our early 20s, and we didn't have the internet, really. We didn't have much technology, apart from, I think it was a TV with 4 channels and a video recorder, do you know what I mean? And that video recorder was sometimes incredibly difficult to set the timer on, I remember. So I got this sense of being a bit like my grandparents talking about the Second World War. Do you know what I mean? Previous me talking about my life without the internet, without the web, without smartphones, without Instagram, Facebook, etc. And I think the millennials of the team just found us pretty antiquated and probably found our pre-internet lives quite strange in the way that I did, hearing the stories about the Second World War from my grandparents. So there's been a lot of change, and that's had a social impact. And it's good to try and be clear about that, because spiritual life, in a way, sort of demands that we have to be clear about the conditions that we're in. It's not a traditional society like, hundreds of years ago, where people just became monks and lived a particular lifestyle, followed a particular set of rules and got on with their practice that way. Modern life is much more complicated, and we're not monks, are we? But we're committed, practicing Buddhists, and we have to evaluate the effects of change in society and how they impact or might impact our spiritual life and our minds. So I'm hoping in this presentation tonight to explore some of the impact of tech, some of the impact, particularly of the internet, and try and reflect on it a bit, try and think clearly about it. And I've not got all the answers by any means. I'm not an expert that's been invited into the studio to talk about spiritual life and tech. I'm just an ordinary guy practicing the Dharma, trying to make sense of what I've seen as a lot of changes in social life caused by tech, and trying to bring awareness to that, and hopefully some practical suggestions to stimulate reflection in all of us in relation to this area. So it goes without saying that we are social beings, yeah? We're socialised from childhood, aren't we? We're socialised by parents, by families, by teachers at school, by the neighbourhood we're in, the towns we live in, the street we live in, the wider family, the wider nation, all sorts of influences on us socially. And we get taught what's right and wrong. We get taught what what we're supposed to do and not do, and what we're supposed to be and not be. And we're deeply conditioned by this socialization. There's a good side to it, isn't there? We can't get away from it. It's what being a human being is about. We need to be socialized to grow and mature. And part of the dynamic of that is that we look for approval. Yeah, we look for approval. It's almost like it's wired into our brains, our survival brain, if you like, that need to fit in, to look for approval, to avoid the pain of disapproval from the groups we're in. Anyway, to play the game, to be winners, if you like. That's a bit of a value of our society, to be a winner, not be a loser, to be respectable, to conform, to be seen to be doing the right thing, wear the right clothes, have the right brands, to be someone, maybe uphold the family name, be a good citizen, have status. And sometimes, of course, we rebel against this as well. We rebel against these expectations, these pressures, and we adopt the role of being the outsider, perhaps, or the black sheep of the family, perhaps. And this is all part of social life, isn't it? It's been like that from varying degrees from the dawn of time to the present. If you look back in history, the ancient Romans at the Hadrian's Wall, they were probably having all these dynamics in the same way as the characters on soap operas like EastEnders do these days. It's part of the human situation. So what if we don't fit in? What if we can't be a winner? What if we can't keep up with the Joneses? What if we don't agree with the values of our family that we were brought up in, the traditions or the expectations? What if, to be truly ourselves, we have to hide parts of ourselves because they're not acceptable? Maybe our sexuality, maybe our gender identity, perhaps, or maybe in the classic film Billy Elliot, who was a young lad growing up in Newcastle area, where he was expected to be into boxing and football. He preferred to be into ballet, and his dad and his older brother found that very hard to accept that Billy was into ballet. And of course, that's a musical down in London these days. It's a very famous film. But it illustrates that issue of being in conflict with our social group. What if we don't want to vote for the same political party as our parents? What if we don't want to follow in the same footsteps as our father's career? What if our views about the environment, Brexit, race, multiculturalism don't concur with the majority view of the social groups we find ourselves in? What if we have a mental health condition that's a stigma? I work with people with schizophrenia, personality disorder. They do experience that as difficult to be part of society because it's stigmatized, it's not acceptable, it's seen as scary, it's frightening. And of course, that can lead to bullying and being abused. So we can find ourselves in conflict with the social groups that we're part of at times. We may feel excluded, we may feel not accepted, we may face hostility, judgment, we may feel threatened or blamed. Yeah. I remember years ago reading about Darwin, Charles Darwin, who obviously was the founder of the theory of evolution and a scientist, but also a deeply devout Christian. Obviously his scientific data was showing, as we know now, the theory of evolution, that we had evolved from apes. And he was very aware that that view was going to conflict with his Christian views and was going to conflict with the largely Victorian Christian views of the time. And of course, so what did he do? He sat on it for about 12 years, I believe. because he was aware of the conflict that this scientific data was probably going to bring into the group, our Christian social group views at the time. And of course, it did have its effects, and it did cause problems, and it changed our society over time, didn't it? And related to evolution is the fact that this desire to be part of a group is quite deep-seated. It's part of the survival brain. Neuroscientists tell us we do this probably because that's how our brains evolved. If you imagine, hundreds, thousands of years ago, we'd been part of nomadic tribes. You had to look after each other. There would be dangers, there would be threats. And if you were excluded from the tribe, you were effectively dead. Yeah, you were effectively dead. So there's probably something in our survival part of our brain that knows if we're criticised or if we're excluded from the group, where it's probably some echo of that in our evolutionary brain that's saying, this is frightening. I could be dead. It activates the survival part of our brain that wants to survive. And of course, there's a couple of very strong emotions around group dynamics. There's shame and guilt, and in a way, they're both aspects of fear. And these are very strong emotions. We'll do a lot to avoid feeling shame. A lot to avoid feeling shame. It can be very toxic. I don't know if you've had experience of being ashamed, maybe at school by the class, perhaps you may be shamed or did something wrong and everyone shamed you. It's very, very painful emotion, very, very toxic. It can really lead to low self-esteem, lack of self-worth. Or maybe you've been sent to Coventry, as it were. That's the expression we use here, isn't it? We've been sent to Coventry because we said something that wasn't approved of or was disliked. And that can be painful, yeah. I remember that happened to me in a kind of light way, not very long ago, after I used to work at Windhorse, which is a Buddhist right livelihood, for nearly 20 years. And that was very positive, largely because I was working with people who shared the same values as me. And we had the same ethical principles. We didn't always get on by any means, but there was a very high bar of getting on in harmony, which was unusual. And then when Windhorse had to close down, unfortunately, my first job was working in an office. And I just wasn't accepted. The office was very, very conservative. And I think because I'd come from this more alternative background, you could say, working at Windhorse, or what was seen to be alternative, I felt excluded. And that was incredibly painful, especially with the contrast of how harmonious and connected it was when I'd been working at Windhorse Evolution. So sometimes it can be a bit of a threat being different in a group if you don't fit into the values. You can feel a bit ashamed that you don't fit in. It's a strong group emotion. There's also fear. Fear of not rocking the boat, for example, can come up, especially at work. I used to work in personnel, so I would hear a lot of complaints about difficulties in work, fears about criticising managers maybe, or cliques and group dynamics at work. And there was just generally fear around retaliation, of some sort of retribution, that one would be pushed out if you dare to criticise the situation. So very, very painful. And this could be particularly hard with whistleblowing. There's a tremendous amount of fear can come up if you feel you have to whistleblow, because it could lead to, being ostracised by the group. So you need a lot of courage to do that. Or it could just be every day, just the sort of fear of setting boundaries with the mother-in-law, because you don't want to hurt her feelings, for example, so there can be everyday small things as well. There can be fear. And this element of shame wasn't something that the Buddha didn't experience. It's very, very interesting how human the Buddha is, even though he's enlightened. When the Buddha went forth from the palace life to live a full-time religious life in the forest, taking on voluntary poverty, if you like, just begging one meal a day, as was the tradition back in India. His father wasn't very happy about that at all, didn't approve of it. And because his father was the king, if you like, of the kingdom, and his son was next in line, was a prince, they were very, very high status. So his father wasn't very pleased about that. And after a long time of the Buddha practicing, eventually gaining enlightenment, he returned to his old kingdom where he'd left. And his father was deeply, deeply ashamed of the Buddha. Incredible, isn't it? Deeply ashamed of the Buddha, because he just saw the Buddha as being living in poverty, being a beggar, effectively. He didn't recognize the Buddha's awakened qualities at that point. It's a very strong emotion. I'm sure the Buddha didn't feel that shame because he was awakened, but that was the response from his father. And being a Buddhist in the modern world can sometimes be a little bit challenging. You know, it depends on the situation you're in. Some social situations are quite positive about Buddhism, and that's good. But some can be a little bit suspicious about it, can't they? You know, if you are, a vegetarian, for example, even can sometimes be a bit challenging for the social groups you might be in. I know when I became a vegetarian back in 1991, growing up in a working class Scottish family, it was deeply weird to my family that I was a vegetarian. It was deeply weird to everyone I worked with that I was a vegetarian. And I had to take a lot of flack about that. Although that's lessened a lot, especially in these very vegan, positive times that we're living in, which I think is a really good thing. It still can be a bit strange, even being a vegetarian. For some people, it can somehow be uncomfortable that you're not the same as the majority of the people around you. So choosing to adopt behaviours can cause, based on ethics and principle, can cause tension. It can cause a bit of suspicion, and that can be uncomfortable. But I think there's a way to deal with this if the group that one's in, if the social situation one's in is a bit negative. I think the practical way to try and change it is to bring compassion in. Yeah, I remember this very much was the case when I was at school. And it was in a small town in Scotland, and there wasn't much diversity at all. And one day, this boy joined the class, and he was albino. Albinos, they've got white hair, very white skin, pink eyes. It looked very, very unusual. And sadly, a lot of people sort of were cruel to him, because he was different. You might recognise similar examples from your own school life might come up. And my mother said to me, because I was reasonably well liked in the school, and she said to me, you need to befriend him. He's really struggling. And I did, I did, and it helped. It helped him to be included in the school, and like he was one of my best friends eventually. But there was stigma around it because he was different, and I never forgot those sorts of lessons from my mother. That compassion is the way to change a negative group into a positive group. My mum's brother was paranoid schizophrenic and got a lot of stigma for being that way. And I think it came out of her own experience of trying to work positively with her own brother's mental health experiences. And if we think about films, if we think about dramas, classic books, there's often tension between the group, the social situation, or the negative social situation, and the individual. Yeah, sometimes there's a hero that emerges that has to try and overcome the obstacles of the social situation, or sometimes, unfortunately, it's a tragedy where the individual gets brought down by the pressures of the negative social situation. So why am I talking so much about social situations group? I'm supposed to be talking about tech, right? The thing is, tech is just a tool. It's just a tool that intensifies a certain aspect of our social life. We are social beings, you know, this is how we relate. But tech can intensify some of those group tendencies, and we have to be aware of that when we're using tech, when we're on our smartphones, when we're on social media, Instagram, etc. We're engaging in a group social dynamic. I mean, it's important to understand that's what's going on, and there's very, very particular dynamics to social media, for example, which we'll go into shortly. One of the things about transforming a negative group to a positive group is that in society, legislation comes in, doesn't it? You know, we've got equality legislation, we've got safeguarding, we've got protest groups, some of the more prominent ones in recent times, like Black Lives Matter, the Me Too. They're all about trying to redress power imbalances in social situations that are causing people suffering. Yeah. So the positive group has a lot of overlap with the Sangha. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities between the positive group and the spiritual community. We share many of the same values. The positive group and the Sangha says, can be characterized by the love mode as opposed to the power mode. And this is a really important key Sangha teaching. If we want to think clearly about social situations, we've really got to understand this distinction between the love mode and the power mode. It's absolutely crucial. So what is the love mode? The love mode is a spirit of kindness, yeah? It's a spirit of cooperation, mutual benefit. It's seeing other people as human beings, yeah? And the power mode is self-interest. It's getting your own way at the expense of others. It's you perhaps using manipulation, threats, coercion, force to get your own way. And you only have to look at the news at 6 p.m. most days to see lots of examples of the power mode going on. The current one, of course, is the Palestine-Jewish conflict, which is awful, isn't it? It's the use of power mode from both ends. There's not going to be conciliation with that at the moment, unless there's deeper understanding, unless there's compassion. Yeah. But the difference between the Sangha and this positive group is that the Sangha is based on a level of awareness. You know, if you want, Sangha talks about the importance of individuality. To be a Buddhist, you need to be an individual. Yeah, an individual is someone that's self-aware, someone that's ethically aware, has conscience, is conscientious, is aware of the consequences of their actions, looks for mutual benefit and cooperation with others. Individual is someone that is not dependent on approval of the group, is able to stand on his own 2 feet, and sometimes be unpopular and sometimes be alone, which is not very easy. And an individual is someone that sees beyond the group labels of class, of race, of colour, religion. Tries to relate to each person as an individual, not as a member of a group. Yeah. So Sangharakshita says, and this is really important, he says the spiritual life is essentially switching from the love mode to the power mode. It's essentially switching from the power mode to the love mode. From that, everything else follows. That's fundamental, yeah. So if we want to understand tech, we we've got to understand to what extent it supports the love mode and to what extent it supports or encourages the power mode. So the first question to ask is, can tech support the love mode? Yeah, can it support the love? I think there's a lot of positives about tech, isn't there? I mean, this is by no means exhaustive. Just a few thoughts are, there's incredible amounts of podcasts, really intelligent podcasts, art sites, websites for good causes and charities. There's free Buddhist audio with hundreds, maybe thousands of great talks on them. We're able to have virtual Dharma classes during the COVID, and that's carried on. I do online retreats myself. This wouldn't have been possible without advancements in tech. We're able to keep in touch really easily on social media, and that's really positive. There's something quite fun, isn't there, about Instagram and Facebook, just being able to see what people are up to, seeing the new selfies they posted, getting the updates every day of their holidays or whatever. It could be fun, it could be innocent, it can be playful, it could be just a really nice way to keep in touch with each other. But what about the power mode? What about the power mode in tech? Especially, I'm thinking the web, the internet. Well, there's a few areas. I'm thinking of areas to do with greed, distraction, and fear and hatred. Yeah, and I've got a few examples from each of these areas, and it's important for us to be aware of these poisons that can come through and get intensified through the use of tech. First of all, techno-lust. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Wanting the next iPhone and desiring the next iPhone, people queuing up, camping out overnight to get the next iPhone, or wanting a better laptop with more memory or a bigger TV with more channels. Yeah, so that can be a bit of a thing, can't it? Addictions can proliferate more easily with tech, I think. Retail therapy, you can shop any time of the day or night. It's really easy to do. Whack it on your credit card, pay later. There's also being exposed to lots and lots of adverts on the net, isn't there? I remember a few weeks ago, I was looking for a new sofa. I think I looked at one sofa and then I was just getting bombarded by adverts all the time for sofas. At first I thought it's amazing. How do they know I want a sofa? You know, but we're all our information is being harvested. So strangely, it seems like it's a kind of freedom, doesn't it, to go online with all this freedom and choice. At the same time, we've never been so controlled. We've never been so, never been so much surveillance. Do you remember the outcry about Facebook and using our data, and we didn't know it was using our data, and how there was a big outcry about it? Adverts, and obviously that plays into that, that part of our group conditioning where we want to be cool, we want to be fashionable, we want to be up to date, we want to have the right brands, and of course it's always changing, and that doesn't help with greed, and it doesn't help develop contentment. And then there's a whole area of distraction, which I think is probably maybe the biggest element of tech use is distraction. I didn't hear Artabandu's talk last week because I was working, but I got the impression from what I heard indirectly that he was like really going into this area of the smartphone and distraction. And it's really, really easy, isn't it, to start off the day with Facebook, wake up, straight onto the smartphone, straight on to looking at. And it's kind of fun and it's kind of enjoyable, but it can also affect your mind. And it doesn't necessarily help with your meditation because you've been so stimulated so quickly. So maybe we need to have a break from our smartphones in the morning if we use them. Yeah. And then, of course, clickbait and you might likes. It's fatal on YouTube. The time can just go. You go on, you watch one video, And before you know it, you might like this other video. Oh yeah, that looks interesting. Click on that, and so on and so on. You get just drawn in, almost seduced into something you didn't really intend to. It just becomes a massive distraction. And there's so many channels on TV now, isn't there? There's hundreds and hundreds of channels on TV. And there's just so much suffering to absorb as well. You know, there's so many appeals, people get compassion fatigue. It's too much choice as well. Sometimes there's so many different perspectives. And there's a lot of different sorts of symptoms that come up. Being working in mental health, and maybe particularly aware of a lot of the mental health symptoms that seem to be arising, maybe particularly from tech. Hypertension, ADHD. I never knew about it, never knew anyone who had that until about 15, 20 years ago. It's become quite a common thing, especially in schools. I worked as a school counsellor for a year as a volunteer, and I worked with a lot of the kids there with ADHD, hypertension, couldn't concentrate in school, disruptive, a really big challenge for teachers and classes there. A lot of that's just coming because they're just on they're on the web, on the net so often. There's also information overload. So much information, and sometimes that's great. Wikipedia, at the touch of a button, you can find out so much. There's so much good about Wikipedia. There's just so much information everywhere about everything at the drop of a hat. And of course, this can lead to hyper-relativism. There's just so many perspectives, and it's almost like our brain hasn't quite evolved to be able to deal with that level of complexity, which is now sort of the norm. Yeah. Burnout and compassion fatigue can sort of come with this level of input. Yeah. Too much green guilt, too much appeals for disasters. And it's not that all these things are not important, they're very important, but it's almost like sometimes it gets overwhelming. And so panic attacks, anxiety disorders, burnout becoming more and more common than they used to be. Comparison is another one, another symptom. Used to be, I remember as a kid, being, in working class Scotland, we all had Dunlop trainers, everyone had Dunlop trainers. And we were all happy in the sense of there was no comparison to kind of make us feel envy or anything like that. And then in the 80s, when things started changing, high-tech trainers came out. That was cool, high-tech. Suddenly Dunlop trainers were rubbish, This one guy in the class got high-tech, and then suddenly we were all unhappy that we all had Dunlop trainers. We all wanted high-techs. And, we laugh, but that's just carried on and on and on. And it creates a lot of comparison. And our happiness is conditioned on who we compare ourselves with. And with Facebook, with social media, Instagram, etc., we're suddenly comparing ourselves with not just with the people on your street that you grew up with. You're comparing yourself with practically everyone in the world. So it's creating a lot of discontent for people. And then lastly, another symptom that comes to mind is a lack of boundaries. I had to double check my phone several times to make sure I'd switched it off because I was just so worried that someone would phone me in the middle of this talk and it'd be incredibly embarrassing, giving a talk on tech and spiritual life and getting a call or a text buzzing through. And it's an issue, isn't it? We have to say that at classes, remember to switch your phone off because, we're not present. We're on our phones and we're going, oh yeah, that's good, and we're not present and we're not really talking. And I get this all the time from my partner, you're not listening to me, you're on your phone. And it's true. It just happens. It seems to just happen. I'm on the phone looking at football results and stuff, and I'm not really present. I think I am. And I'm getting criticised for it, and in a way, quite rightly so. So yeah, there's a lot to be said there. And then lastly, the whole area of fear in the net. That's an interesting one. I don't know if you've ever had your Facebook account hacked. and then someone sent an embarrassing message to everyone in your Facebook friends, and then someone says, "I think you might have been hacked," and then you look and you go, "Oh my God, I didn't send that message." You have to write to everyone and say, "I've been hacked. That message was not for me." And you have to reset your passwords. It's very stressful, incredibly stressful. And that has its effect on your mind. And this sort of thing is going on. We start to worry about having an ID, ID theft, and worrying about our passwords and stuff. So the more that we do everything online, the more there is potential for fear arising as well. It's fine when it works, but when it doesn't work, it produces a lot of stress and fear. And then there's a whole area of cancel culture, and trolling. Trolling's awful, isn't it? It's like people will say the nastiest things on social media, which they'll never say to your face. There's something about the internet and stuff where, because you're not really with the other person properly, you're not really connected, some sort of side of people comes out to really put the booting on you. And it can be quite painful, and it seems to be a phenomenon of the sort of it's kind of you think you're connected, but you're not really in the way that you would be if you were with them in person. It's an odd phenomenon, and it's a big thing, isn't it? People getting cancelled, celebrities are getting cancelled all the time. Russell Brand's the most recent one, being cancelled. People, sending tweets or messages and they're not politically correct and getting cancelled. So it's a very, very kind of dark, fearful area. You can feel a little bit scared sometimes to say something in case you make a mistake. Here I am giving a talk to you guys. It's all very positive, but I know it's been recorded by Jeremy. And this is going to go on YouTube. If I make a mistake, I might get cancelled. Somebody might write to Katie Ranger and get cancelled. It does cross your mind. Somebody might object to something I say. There might be something in the comments at the bottom of this video when it goes on YouTube, and I might get pulled. You might never see me again. So it's a big fear. And it's happening. And it's also, just. There's a whole darker side, isn't there? There's a dark web. I really don't want to talk about that, but it's out there. Grooming, the whole adult sexual side of the internet. There's all the human trafficking, exploitation. It's really seedy, and unfortunately, children sometimes access all this, and that's a bit. If you're a parent, that's a massive fear, isn't it? On one level, the dark web, but also I think parents really fear just how much they see their teenage sons and daughters imitating celebrities who are not very well behaved, and a lot of that's through Instagram and culture, the Kardashian culture, all that sort of thing. It's a real worry. So if we're going to flick the switch, of the power mode to the love mode in our relation to tech, we're going to have to look at some principles here. The greed side of tech, we have to remember that the Buddha taught, simplicity and contentment. Do we really need all the things that the ads are trying to get us to buy? A simple thing with impulse buys I got from the subculture of the minimalists is have a kind of 14-day rule or something where you want to buy something but sit in it for 14 days, and if you still want to buy it after 14 days, then maybe it's genuine. What I found by doing that is that pretty much 90% of the things I think I want to buy, I don't really want to buy if I sit on it for 14 days. It could be 7 days or longer. It doesn't really matter, but it's having a kind of firewall, a break in your impulse buying, because there's something so seductive about adverts, and there's something in us that just wants to be, I'm going to get that. I want to buy it now. And a lot of the stuff you don't actually need, And this is the thing about what Buddhism, the Sangha here, we try to encourage people to think about what they really need rather than what they think they want. Because most of the time, what we really need is friendship, we need connection, we need meaning, we need a certain amount of depth, we need to feel part of a community. And if we meet these needs, we actually don't crave that much. Yeah, so we're not so prey to retail therapy through advert bombardment. And the sort of society we live in, they call it a neoliberal capitalism, don't they? It's been the main kind of gig of our economy since the Thatcher years in the 80s. And it's led to, a lot of people believe it's led to a loss of community, an atomization of society. And sometimes these deeper needs that have been lost through the way we have our economy set up get papered over, as it were, by trying to fill those needs, fill the emptiness in unskillful ways. Yeah. So yeah, contentment, simplicity, meeting our real needs is important. Distraction, of course, I'm sure Arta Bandi went into it quite a bit last week, it's about mindfulness is important with distraction. So having timeouts from tech can be surprisingly positive. If you go on a weekend retreat at the centre, you will probably have, you'll probably switch your phone off for the weekend. It can be surprisingly enjoyable not having your phone, not having access to, the net. You start to meet your real needs on the retreat. And it's interesting when you come off a retreat, having been feeling a lot happier and a lot more aware, you start to notice how draining it can be, being on the web so much, watching TV so much. It's something that I think we've maybe lost sight of a little bit with things getting so busy at times. We don't protect our depth. And we don't maybe have as much space for contemplation, for reflection and depth. And gadgets like the smartphone are invading that space that we might have had in the past more easily. There's a South Korean kind of cultural critic who lives in Germany and teaches at a German university that I really like. Byung-Hul Chan is his name, but he says cultural achievements presume deep contemplation. It presumes an environment where deep contemplation is possible. Yeah, cultural achievements. I was thinking about Cambridge in relation to that. It's a really cultured city here. It's got a famous university. It's got individuals that have changed our world. I mentioned Darwin. We've had Newton here. We've had what's his name? Hawkins, yeah, all sorts of, you could look at the history of Cambridge University, all the geniuses that have been walking these streets, and they wouldn't have been able to come up with the creative things they came up with unless they were at university and having the space to contemplate and think and reflect. And I do a little bit of work with counselling work with university students, and one of the things that always comes up is how busy they are and how the pressures to pass exams, and that's a new thing. You used to just go to university, you just spend a few years there. There weren't exams in the past. You were just present and you just got on with stuff. The whole competitive side is quite new. I have to say, I'm wondering how helpful it is for creativity to have that kind of pressure. Byung-Chul Han seems to think the same. So yeah, lastly, fear and confusion, hatred element. What's the Dharma got to say about that in terms of flicking the switch into the love mode? Well, the metta bhavana, it's one of our core practices at the center, the mindfulness and breathing, the metta bhavana. The metta bhavana is so important, cultivating positive emotion. That's what the world needs. That's how we need to respond to darkness, to fear. The metta bhavana resources us with positive emotion, yeah. It also helps us to build friendships with others and to build community, which is what I think we all really want and need. In terms of thinking clearly, that's the whole confusion side of things. You know, the individual rises above the reactive patterns of the social situation and starts to using his self-awareness, starts to reflect on why things are the way they are. It's one of the qualities of a true individual. And we try to encourage that here. You know, the mindfulness of breathing is in trying to encourage self-awareness, but also through communication, trying to stimulate us to think about our experience, to think about the society we're in, to think about the direction of our lives. But there are ways that you can formally learn to think clearly. And one of them I recommend is join a Dharma study group. Yeah. Doing that as a practice is a fabulous experience of clear thinking, challenging yourself with the thoughts of great minds like the Buddha, like Sangharakshita. We do a 4-year course, a 4-year Mitra study course. Some of you here are Mitras and old members, you'll have done that. If you haven't done the Mitra study course, maybe think about becoming a Mitra and doing it, because it's an amazing journey in terms of thinking clearly, becoming more aware, becoming more of an individual. It's a brilliant way to develop clear thinking. It gives you a lot of freedom, yeah. And this is the thing I think about the neoliberal culture we live in. It gives us a sense that we're free. We think, yeah, we can do anything, can't we? You know, we've moved on from the early 20th century control cultures, you know, with empire and control. And we've got this kind of more open, kind of more permissive culture. It's all about freedom of choice, isn't it? But it lacks depth. It's freedom to consume, isn't it? It's freedom to go on holiday. It's freedom to travel wherever you want. It's freedom to live how you like. And there's some positives to that, but it also lacks depth, I think. And I think it's because we don't have a deep conception of freedom. In Buddhism, we have a deep conception of freedom, I believe, and that is embodied in the symbol of the Buddha, his enlightenment, his awakening. That's where real happiness is to be found, not really, if we actually are honest, not really by what we consume, not really by the number of likes we get on Facebook, not really by our YouTube videos going viral. So I want to just finish by just drawing attention to a couple of images, you know, that sort of struck me about social media and the internet. One is that we use the term World Wide Web, www, the web. Isn't that an interesting image? It's like, for me, it just brings up the sense of a spider's web, you know. And I think it's fascinating that we call it the web, and we've got to be careful that we don't get tangled up in the web and lose our awareness. It's a bit like there's a spider of unawareness. It's just waiting for us to get tangled in the web, and then we'll get, as it were, eaten up by this spider of unawareness. So we could see, we could see it as the World Wide Web, or we could see it as the net. Sometimes we call it the net, and I like that image of the net, you know, because it gives this sense of interconnectedness. You know, we're all interconnected. We're all part of the same network. And there's a lovely image in Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, of Indra's net, and it's this infinite net of jewels that are all connected together, and each jewel reflects every other jewel in the net. And it's a very beautiful expression of metta, that sense of interconnectedness. So maybe if we're going to use the internet, we need to think in terms of how is this helping me to connect skillfully, positively, in the spirit of metta with others. So I better leave it there. I've spoken for a good 40 minutes, and hopefully that's some stimulation in this area of tech and the social dimension, and hopefully some of those teachings from Sangharakshita around the group and the individual, the true individual, and the love mode and the power mode, which I think is so powerful and so important for us living in the world but trying to practice spiritually as Buddhists and become individuals. It gives us something to critique what's happening to us so that we don't just get seduced unthinkingly into all these new forces that are happening, and maybe we can choose to use them skillfully in a way that will support us in our spiritual lives. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.